Welcome to episode 71 of Real Health Radio. You can find the links talked about as part of the show at the show notes located at www.7, all spelled out, so seven-health.com/71.
Welcome to Real Health Radio. Health advice that's more than just about how you look. And here's your host, Chris Sandel.
Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of Real Health Radio. I'm actually recording this intro in Thailand on the island of Koh Tao. I've been here for 6 days, and this is my last day before heading on to Sydney for Christmas. The weather's been a little patchy, but it is absolute paradise up here. And actually, the most exciting news of the trip is I got engaged. I proposed to Ali, and she said yes. And we've had just such a magical holiday. So 2006 has been a rather tough year, as I've talked about in some of the other podcasts. So this has at least been a nice way to end the year and end it on a really great note. And because I'm on a tiny island, the internet isn't the best. So I'm hoping that I'm going to be able to upload this show while I'm here. If not, Thai Airways has Wi-Fi, so I may be able to get it to happen at 30,000 feet. And then if neither of those work, I will have to upload it when I arrive in Sydney. So the show may be a little later than usual. With today's show, it's another interview, and the guest for today is Erin Brown. Erin is a writer, speaker, and activist whose work focuses on women, healing, and autonomy. She utilizes authentic narrative to promote empathy and compassion towards ourselves and others. She's a feminist, an intuitive, a firm believer in radical self-care, and a coach, unafraid to be big in presence or in thighs. So I've been aware of Erin's name for the last couple of years. I knew she was involved with Girls Gone Strong, and I've seen bits and pieces that she'd written. But more recently, I was listening to Sarah Vance's podcast where Erin was a guest, and I was really impressed with everything she had to say. So I got in contact and invited her to come on the show. So as part of the show, we talk about how her daughter Lola was a catalyst for so much of the change in her life. We talk about her book called Letters to Lola and why she wrote it. She talks about how she transformed her brand from Fit Mama training to I Am Erin Brown, and how this happened as she shifted from being a personal trainer to more of a speaker and an activist. And Erin also runs a retreat called I Empower, which is for women who've been victims of assault. And Erin talks about her own history with assault and why this has been such a powerful process with these retreats for herself and for others. So this show therefore comes with a trigger warning that we do touch on stuff and issues around assault. So if that's something that is triggering for you, then I just want you to know that up front. I really love this conversation with Erin. She's just got such an amazing message, and I highly recommend that you check out her writing and her Facebook page. So without further ado, this is my interview with Erin Brown. Hey Erin, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
So for those people in my audience who don't know who you are, do you want to describe, say, what you currently do and how you got there? And I know you have quite a winding story, so just share what comes to mind, and I can go back and pick up on anything that I want to discuss that you may not mention.
Sure. It's a very winding story. The Cliffs Notes is I was a social worker. I became a mom and realized how poorly I was treating myself, both in how I talked to myself and how I treated my body. And in an effort to be a better role model for her, got really into self-care and just talking to myself better, which turned into a brief personal training career, which then morphed into more just like writing and activism around body image, but also just the like final plan for me is to move body image and anything else that is keeping women in their own way in terms of leadership, getting those things out of the way. So I'm about dismantling anything in my way to clear the path for my daughter. And that is through writing and speaking and various forms of activism. So that's the Cliffs Notes.
Okay, cool. So one of the things on your site it mentions is that you said you first remember being concerned about your body from age 4, and then you really suffered quite terribly with self-esteem issues. Was this kind of behavior modeled to you in your home growing up, or were you like just a sensitive kid?
Both. I think that I didn't realize until I was becoming a mother that it was role modeled in my home.
Okay.
I thought when I was 4 and quit ballet because I thought I was too fat to be there, that was just the right thing to do, that I was having a natural reaction to being me and that there was something wrong with my body that needed to be fixed. And so I wasn't at that point, of course, like dismantling where that message had come from until, like I said, I was faced with raising my own daughter and realized that there were lots of places that we like to point to where this comes from, the media and magazines and Photoshop, but that I had first learned this from my mother, that I wasn't reading Cosmopolitan magazine at 4, but rather watching my mom beat herself up in ways that women do. And she wasn't doing anything outrageous either. And I have a wonderful mother who would have never said anything negative to me about me. But I watched her really struggle with feelings of inadequacy around her weight and always trying to lose weight and comparing herself to others. And so I just patterned my behavior off of hers.
Yeah. And I think kids are very perceptive like that. You can tell them one thing, but they pick up when they're not doing those things with themselves.
Right.
And so, I mean, what was food like for you growing up in your household?
Well, it was like good or bad. You know, there are good foods, and the good foods in my house growing up were mostly processed, fat-free was the thing at the time, diet foods, or bad foods, which was like chocolate and things that are delicious. And so it was about a moral thing, really. And I'm sure that my parents weren't aware of this teaching. It was just what they were struggling with themselves. Okay.
And you, I mean, on your side, it said you kind of yo-yo dieted, and I've heard you talk about this before in terms of like school and college. Were you doing that on your own? Were you going on diets with, say, your sister or your mom or with friends, or how did that play out?
I don't think that I ever really successfully completed like a diet challenge or any of that kind of stuff that people like to do. But it certainly was common conversation amongst my girlfriends. And if we were trying to lose weight, that was sort of normal. If we were discussing things that were wrong or negative about our bodies, that was normal. That was sort of a bonding tool. That is something I'd like to see women move away from. But we were constantly talking about that kind of stuff, even if we weren't doing anything about it.
Okay. And look, you mentioned earlier on about your daughter and Lola and that being kind of a real catalyst for you to start making certain changes or wanting to have her have a different experience to what you had. And are you able to speak to that a little bit more?
Yes. Well, so my background being social work, I had done a ton of parenting classes and did parent education with my clients. And a lot of that was focused on what kinds of behaviors you're role modeling. And in the acute cases I was dealing with, it was a lot about like stress management and stuff like that. But I had the foundation for understanding that sort of childhood development and knew that as my daughter's same-sex parent that I would be her primary role model. And so I really uprooted my entire life thinking that, all I have to teach this little girl is how to hate herself. And I want to be a different kind of role model for her. And there are all of these damaging messages that seek to make women less in every way, regardless of what body size that is. There's a specific body size depending on your culture that you're supposed to have. And there's a specific way your voice is supposed to be, which is never okay. And just so many ways to leave girls and women feeling inadequate and not confident. And so the best thing I knew to do to give my daughter a better chance at being a multifaceted, fully realized human being was to be a role model who lived outside of those expectations. And so I really sought to chip away at all of the damaging ways I was living. And instead of thinking, do I deserve to treat myself like this? I started thinking, how do I want her to behave? How do I want her to live? How do I want her to think about herself? And then in every step of the way, role modeled my behavior after what I wanted for her, which in turn has become about what I believe I deserve for myself. But it's always grounded, especially when I'm having darker moments, in what I want for her, because that is a light that never goes out.
And I guess with what you're saying there, I think a lot of people can intellectually understand that, but then putting that into practice would probably be quite difficult. So how did that look like for you to transition from someone who was talking to themselves poorly or was thinking negatively about themselves to transition to the place where you are now? And how did that start out?
Well, it really started with just being mindful of how I spoke about myself. When I found out that I was having a girl, I decided that I was not going to speak poorly about my body ever again. That was my, I'm never going to do this again. And it was really kind of a sad process because in that switch of mindfulness, I realized just how often I was saying terrible things about myself, both just in my mirror and in my head, but also in ways that I would explain away or give defenses to my body or what I was choosing to eat. I mean, it's just like an all day long justification process that I learned to shut down in that mindfulness process. And I started saying more positive things to myself. But more positive things in the beginning was not you're beautiful and wonderful and everything's great, but was more really neutral. So the most positive thing that I could come up with to say to myself in the beginning was like, this is what you look like on Tuesday. This is what you look like on Wednesday, which doesn't sound profound. But when I was regularly telling myself that I was disgusting and worthless, this is what you look like on Tuesday was a really powerful shift. And then when I got comfortable and neutral, started to find more positive things. And I really spent an entire year in terms of my personal growth only focused on that, on saying neutral things to myself and looking for more positive things to say, because it was so ingrained in me and such a regular part of my life that I had to really focus all of my energy on that before I did anything else. But it has completely shifted everything about my relationship to myself because I talk to myself the way I want my daughter to talk to herself. It's something that I see people struggle with a lot because they'll come to me and say, you know, my kid thinks her thighs are fat or whatever. You know, my kid is little and already saying these things, and I know I don't say those things in front of them. But that's the thing. Like when you live with a child, they see everything, they hear everything, they feel everything. And so it really is a matter of working on the way you experience yourself and slowly working out of those old habits, because they'll experience all of that even if you feel like you're somehow censoring it in front of them. That's just not a real possibility.
Yeah. And I mean, two things I want to mention as part of that. The first is getting people to be okay with just neutrality. I think too often people hear the whole body love and body positivity, and it just feels so far from where they are. And just starting that process of let's just get to a place of being neutral, being okay, like seeing my body not for its solely as an aesthetic ornament, but as something where it's like, this allows me to go to work or this allows me to move or whatever it may be, and just being okay with being neutral about things. But just the other thing is, I think there's a real undervalue of how much the internal dialogue and how we talk to ourselves shapes the way that we act and are in the world. And that if you are talking to someone like your daughter the way that you talk to yourself, no one would be surprised if your daughter was then feeling terribly about her, about herself. But when people do this to themselves all day, they're kind of like shocked as to why they don't feel so good.
Well, and it's just become normal, particularly for women, to be talking this way about themselves all the time. Yeah. Just today, I was picking up some ice cream from the grocery store, and I was getting Halo Top. I freaking love Halo Top. And the woman who was checking me out mentioned something about the ice cream and how they've been advertising a lot, and it's so cool that there's something that you can have that you don't have to like hide, that actually has some good for you qualities, and was talking about like shame and food and how we obviously all want to lose weight, and this like 30-second conversation checking me out for groceries. It's just such a normal part of the way we relate to each other that it's hard, without being really mindful about it, to even notice how often it's happening. And then if your kid is standing right next to you, they're getting a whole education about ice cream being good or bad or shameful or hidden, just in this conversation that we think is benign because we have it all the time.
Yeah, definitely. One of the things you also talked about on your side is how your boyfriend, who is now your husband, stayed with you after you gained weight. And to quote you, you said, "This man just didn't do me a solid and forgive my weight gain. He made very clear that he loved every part of me and that you felt this love unconditionally." And what is interesting about this comment to me is I work with so many women who are in relationships where they are loved unconditionally, and they hear this from their significant other constantly, but it never seems to make it through the wall. So for me, when I read this, like, my impression was something had to have changed in you, or something had to have shifted to allow that to come in, so that you just didn't reject that comment. And what, like, could you speak to that, or do you agree with that comment?
Well, I didn't believe it, for sure.
Okay.
And I really think, looking back, that's subconsciously part of why I gained so much weight when we first got together, because I thought, well, you like me now when I've just done all of these damaging things to lose weight. But what if I looked like I did before? Surely you'd be gone. And so it was in an effort to push him away. And it really took years of him sticking around for me to realize that he was really there for me, and that he really loved me exactly as I was. But that was certainly not something I took at face value. It's something that I had to really study about him, our relationship, before I could believe it. In the same way, we all bring baggage to a relationship. If you've been cheated on a bunch of times, then it takes a long amount of loyalty from someone before you realize that that's something that you can let your guard down about. And so to trust that he could love me regardless of how I showed up physically was something that took a lot of time for me to really allow in.
Okay. And I think what you said there is also quite common, is there's that just kind of continuing to test and test and test, because you are waiting for the other shoe to drop to be like, see, I knew he wasn't really into me. And so there's that just constant pushing. And I guess at some point there's the, okay, I don't need to do this anymore. I feel pretty comfortable that they're not going to go.
Right.
And so your website used to be called Fit Mama Training, and then it changed to I am Erin Brown. So,
yes.
So how long were you doing, like, the training, the exercise side of things?
2 or 3 years. I sort of organically became a trainer, because as I was talking to myself better and decided to up the ante and wanted to really treat my body better as again, being a good example for my daughter, I got really into working out for the first time in my whole life, because I wasn't working out and then looking at the scale and pissed that nothing was happening. I was really just setting aside time to care for myself, to role model that for my daughter, and got hooked because I was completely obliterating all of the ideas that I had about my body before, that something was wrong with it, that exercise wasn't for me because I just wasn't into it, or that it didn't work for me. So what was the point? And enjoying it and finding that I was strong and that I had the capacity to be fast, and I was hooked. And so I lost a significant amount of weight, but was really just excited about seeing what my body could do. But as a result of that physical transformation, people were constantly asking me, like, what are you doing? And so becoming a personal trainer was just sort of an organic process there. But I realized after a couple of years of running boot camps and doing personal training stuff that I was very rarely, if ever, utilizing my online platform to, like, advertise my services, which is kind of the point.
Yeah.
But rather was talking a lot about self-care and the way you talk to yourself, and that all of this stuff is really underpinnings of misogyny, and really going after social justice issues. And I was having a lot of backlash at the time. I think primarily because people saw Fit Mama Training because someone shared a post of mine or something and were like, I like fitness and moms. And so they had expected, like, fitness memes and tips about getting abs, and they were instead receiving feminism.
Yeah.
And so people started saying a lot of things that sounded a whole lot like, who do you think you are? And so I just changed everything to I am Erin Brown as the answer to who do you think you are? I right-sized myself and gave myself the ability with that platform to do whatever I needed to do within my integrity, which changes a lot all the time regarding what's happening socially and being, aware of the world around me, which is important to me. If I was still training, I wouldn't be able to sit quiet when amazing social justice injustices are happening in the world and just continue to talk about lunges. So It was a way that I could broaden my voice. It also slowed down the likes because it's not as catchy, Yeah.
But
it did also give people pause, I think, before looking into my message and seeing what I'm about before following me. And so I get a lot less of that random trolling feedback because people aren't expecting one thing from me and getting something else.
Sure. I would love to, if you know, like, what are the stats of the people who were with you to start with at Fit Mama Training versus how many of those have still stayed on now that you've made that transition?
Oh my gosh, I have no idea. I do know it shifts all the time, and it cracks me up every once in a while. I'll see someone online talking about, like, I posted this thing and then 3 people unfollowed me. And for a while, especially after I changed my name, I would have thousands of people unfollow me, even when I was posting things that were pretty much regular fare for me.
Yeah.
So a lot of people left and a lot of people stayed. And in the last year or so, the demographic has shifted dramatically such that 42% of the people who follow me are men, which I found surprising and really interesting since I'm very specific about speaking to women's issues. But there are certainly plenty of men who relate to my story. And then also a lot of men who write to me and say that they have such a more compassionate understanding of their female partners reading what I have to say. Because this stuff is hard to talk about. Like, nobody wants to sit down with their husband and be like, look, I know that we haven't had sex in a while, but I'm feeling really badly about my thighs. And so these things all happen in hushed tones behind closed doors, and I can shed light there in a way that is helpful to men as well as it is to women.
Yeah. And look, I love reading your stuff. I'm a little different in terms of I spend my life reading websites and books aimed at women because this is what I do for a job. But no, I think there are lots of women whose tone is very much aimed at women, and there's you can talk about empowerment, but there's a way that it comes across where I think it's going to push a lot more men away. Whereas with your writing, yes, I can tell it's written for a woman, but it's like it is very much universal.
Well, I'm always thinking about what the value is and what I'm saying, and if it can be valuable to anyone who would read it, which is really challenging, especially when taking on polarizing issues. But it's not so much that I'm interested in pleasing everybody. It's that I want to keep as many people possible at the table. Because if we disagree, then I really want you to hear me. And so I try to be thoughtful about how I present things such that if somebody didn't agree with me, they might sit and think about it a little longer. Whether or not they stay, it's not really a business model so much as it's that I'm really interested in social change, which means for me and not for everyone, that I want to be mindful of my impact and not just that I'm saying it the loudest or most interesting way.
Yeah. Definitely. And look, just going back to the training, the exercise side of things. I mean, when I first saw photos of you, and I think it was probably from like a Girls Gone Strong or like some photos you had done lifting weights, like the impression I got was you're someone who has spent your life lifting weights, and that has just been your calling for a long time. And that obviously is not the case when I then read and learned more about your story in terms of it came much more recently. So I'd love for you to just explain that a little bit, just because I know so many people are similar to you in terms of exercise didn't naturally come to them when they were really young, and it is something they would like to pick up on, even if they're later on in life. And also the other part of it, which I'd love you to share as well, is just how it's been helpful outside of just the traditional "it's helped me lose weight" type of talk that most people focus on.
Well, First of all, I just really genuinely believed that I had gotten a raw deal from God or my parents or the universe or whoever puts the deal together because I had a body that wasn't how I wanted it to be, and I didn't like healthy foods, and I didn't like exercising like all of those other people who were somehow programmed different than me, and it just didn't work for me. And so I would go on long kicks where like I would run, and I would run and say terrible things to myself and then come home and stand on the scale and see that it wasn't working. Or I would barely eat all week and be doing exercise DVDs in my living room and see that I'd lost 1 pound only to gain it if I was hydrated and just feel completely defeated. Part of the reason that I didn't like it, because I do a lot of those same things that I hated before and like them now, is because I had never tried to like it. I was utilizing that time to really belittle myself and beat myself up and to notice all of the things that I wasn't good at. You know, I'd be at the gym staring at other women and how much better they were at the elliptical machine and how much more impressive their incline and how much better their butt looked in their spandex. And so I wasn't ever really using that time to get into my body or experience endorphins or think of it as time to myself. And part of what was circumstantially helpful to me when I started exercising again is that I had a newborn baby at home. And so the only time that I had to myself, that I wasn't nursing anyone or wiping a poopy diaper out, was when I was exercising. And so it became a sacred time and space for me. And in that time and space, I was really exploring what could I enjoy about this, because it was the only time and space I had created for myself. So that started with walks and turned into runs. And then I did a lot of Jillian Michaels DVDs. Okay. And then I finally joined a gym. Yeah, I love Jillian Michaels exercise videos. I have to mute them, though, because she talks about skinny jeans and stuff a lot that I'm just like, it was so good if you could just make this not sound like that. But I went to the gym and I started going with my sister, and we would get on the elliptical machine because that's what I knew how to do. And I was just bored, and I tried watching shows and I was just bored, and I would look into the giant weightlifting room where there were only men and thought, what they're doing looks like so much more fun to me. So my sister had a friend who was training to be a trainer, and he gave us a program, and we like together took a deep breath and went in there and started doing like dumbbell lunges and started working through this program. I wanted to learn how to lift the really heavy weights, though, and I knew that that would require some help. And so I enlisted the help of a personal trainer at the gym, and it was like a box gym where you get 2 free sessions or whatever to try and get you to sign up for training. Yep. And the trainer that I worked with was unfortunately really awful. He told me that it was too bad my sister was the hot one. And she is a much different body type than me. She's very lean and a yoga instructor. He told me, even though I just lost 80 pounds, that I still had a pooch. And he put my measurements into some terrible app he had on his computer and moved the body fat down to like 12% or something and told me that that was my goal. And so I didn't work with him again.
Unsurprisingly.
But it put a fire under me to learn how to do that anyway. And so that's when I pursued, actually I got a bunch of weightlifting magazine, like old Oxygen magazines from a used bookstore for $0.25 and started following the programming in there. And I watched YouTube videos about form. And I just found a lot of power in both claiming that space for myself that looked like it was really just constructed for men. And at the time, there were no other women in there. But also in taking that space for myself that man specifically tried to take from me by making me feel bad instead of teaching me what I wanted to learn from him. Yeah. So because of all of that, I find power in the weight room that I couldn't find anywhere else, especially when most of my life was poopy diapers and nursing, which I wouldn't take any of that back. But, you know, wiping a poopy diaper at 3:00 in the morning did not feel powerful. It felt like depletion. And so that was the time where I found myself feeling grounded and powerful and strong. And it's still the place that I go to find those things, especially in the winter when I'm subject to depression, or if I'm, feeling paralyzed by things going on in the world. That is a place where I know that I can always find strength. And it's not dependent on what aesthetic I take in there. And it's not even dependent on the weight on the bar. It's just me getting into my body and seeing what I'm capable of and coming out of there feeling like if I need to, I can crush it today because I started here.
And I think the big thing is like you got into the process of doing it and enjoying it for those moments. And I think too much the focus is on this will be good in 6 months, or this will be good by the time I go on holiday and I get to fit into those clothes. And it's kind of a means to an end as opposed to actually enjoying the moments of being there. Right.
Yeah. And I really struggle I've in recent years tried to find an aesthetic goal to work at. And I just finished Bigness Project, which is Jen Sinkler and Courtney Thomas's new program. I was working on trying to get some guns going. But because that is such a sacred time for me, it's really hard for me to even try to focus on aesthetic goals now, because it just is time that I'm spending time with myself, being in my body and seeing what I'm capable of. And that's it. And it's actually significantly more motivating. And that makes anything that happens 6 months or a year from now based on your consistency just sort of icing on the cake, but not the reason that you have to show up. It's not pass fail. It really is about how you can feel better today.
Yeah. And I know one of the things you've talked about when I've heard you interviewed about this before is being okay with taking that time for yourself to exercise. I think you said that there was a struggle with that initially when you're a mom and thinking that you need to be giving all that time to your child or to your daughter, and being okay with just looking after yourself or taking time out for yourself and doing whatever it needs to be. And in your case, that be exercise.
Yes. Well, and a lot of that is studying my husband, because these are things that he doesn't struggle with, and I don't think that he should. So when he decides to go, play a game of pickup basketball, he doesn't justify that for himself, and he doesn't explain himself away to me or say, I'll be a better husband and father if I go take this time to myself. He just is a multifaceted human that has hobbies and needs and desires time for himself and time being physical and all of those things. And so for me, because those messages are so different for men and women, the way that I've reframed that for myself is not that I'm being selfish or even that this will make me a better mom, though it absolutely does when my cup is full, but rather that I don't want to teach my daughter that her life is about being a martyr. And so I get to do those things because I want to, because I want time alone, or because I want to sweat, or because it's Tuesday. I don't need to have any special parameters to give me permission to live a full life. I just get to do it. And when I think about what that means long term, it means that I'm teaching my daughter that she deserves her own time and attention, whatever that looks like to her, and not that she is supposed to give up everything for everyone around her to the point that she's completely depleted. So that's what I think about. And that still creeps in, because I do make the choice to not spend 20 minutes with my daughter after school if I haven't gotten it in and go for a quick run or whatever. But she sees me doing that, and that's powerful. It means that she will always have someone to take care of her because I've shown her how it's done.
Yeah, and I think, teaching kids that kind of independence as well, is just so valuable. So one of the, things I wanted to talk about was you've written a book called Letters to Lola. So for those people who haven't read the book, I haven't read the book. It's on my Amazon list. I'm waiting for it to be delivered. But what is the book about, and what was the goal with writing it?
Well, I started writing it when I was pregnant with her.
Okay.
And I was thinking forward to...
And how old is she now, just for point of reference?
She's 8.
Okay.
But I was thinking about the time in my life when I needed my mom the most and felt like I had the least access to her.
Okay.
And a not insignificant part of that was my pushing her away, which is totally developmentally appropriate around preteen, teen years, depending on the individual child's development. But I so needed my mother's advice, and I so needed to understand her more, where I come from a family where those kinds of conversations about, our past are not on the table at all. I needed guidance, and I was grappling with, very real issues, including trauma, all by myself. But knowing that those years would come and wanting to have my words available to my daughter, and also knowing that she might push me away like a lot of kids do, I wanted to have all of those things written down ahead of time. I wanted to have written about healthy sexual relationships and drugs and friendship and all of the rocky road ahead of her before we got there, so that she wouldn't see my advice or thoughts as some sort of backlash to not liking her significant other or having something against her friends or not understanding anything, but really just giving her my perspective that she could have access to without having to actually talk to me if she needed it. I also wanted to be honest with her about my own experience, because I bring, like all of us, I bring baggage into parenting her. And one of the big things in that is I bring being a woman who's subject to sexual assault, which means that I have a lot of anxiety around her and dating and wanting to keep her safe and protected in ways that aren't really possible or real. Yeah. And so I also wanted to divulge those things to her so that she would have what I believe is more of a clean slate, that what I don't heal, I pass on, but the more honest I can be about those things, the better I can serve her honestly as her parent. And so I gave her a copy before I put it out. She's very mature, and told her that she was welcome to read it. And we talked about some of the things we hadn't discussed in it before, because I didn't want to publish a book of secrets. But she decided that she's not ready to read it yet, and she wants to be 10 or 11, but definitely in the 2 digits, her language, before she reads it, because for some reason she thinks that will be a better time for her.
Okay.
But it's just a series of essays about growing up female and my experience, and sort of nuggets of wisdom for her.
And were there topics or were there essays that you wrote that you then thought, actually, I can't share this with my daughter, or I don't want to now include this? Were there stuff that just didn't make the cut?
Were there letters that didn't make the cut? I'm sorry. No, but there were things that I had to get outside feedback about, specifically the chapter about sex. I shared with a couple of people, including my editor, but I shared with friends. And it was just more dark and stormy and scary than I wanted it to be.
Okay.
And so I had all of the verbiage I wanted there, but rearranging it so that it was more positive and less oh my God, I can't believe we're talking about this. So there wasn't anything that didn't make the cut, but there were definitely things that needed others' eyes to make sure that I was conveying what I wanted to and not just my fears.
Okay. And was the intention always to release it as a book, or was it almost like a cathartic episode or a process for you, and that you were going to share it with her, and that was kind of it?
Well, originally it was going to be a bunch of essays that I wrote, and then I was going to combine it with essays that other women had written for her, and then just give it to her. But in that time, a lot changed, including my work. And so I decided to publish the first book as the book of essays of mine. And then the plan is to have a third book. There's a second sex education book that's coming this year, written by a sexologist friend of mine. And then the third book will be essays from people with different experiences and different identities than me, both honoring that my daughter and I have different identities, and because I want her to have some level of empathy and understanding for people whose experiences are completely different than hers. So it evolved based on my work and people asking for it. but also, what was feasible and possible at the time. So the first one is just the essays from me. I also have a PDF on my website that has a lot of similar questions for other parents to answer for their kids, because my hope is not just for me to be able to give a lot of advice to girls and women, but to open up these conversations between other parents and children. Because I think we miss so much being afraid that we're going to share too much with them or scare them or bring things up too fast. And the scarier thing to me is that we say too little too late or nothing at all and leave our kids feeling really alone. So my hope in publishing it is both that it gives some hope to other people for having these conversations, but also gives them the courage to do it themselves.
Okay. Definitely. And look, it is something I'm looking forward to reading. I don't have kids. I'm wanting to have kids. And it is a conversation I've had with myself in terms of how much do I want to share about my experiences around different things. And so I think it will be useful for myself and my girlfriend to have a read of and start a dialogue between us about where we would want to go with this stuff.
Yeah. Well, and in our house, nothing is off limits, but part of it is because, Mommy has a writing platform wherein there are no secrets, and her dad used to be a rapper, and so a lot of his life experiences are available on iTunes.
Okay.
There's no hiding from ourselves. But what I found while I was really afraid to start having more difficult conversations, like the sex talk has been pretty regular this year. It's not anything we've ever shied away from, but there's just been more specifics given this year. While I was nervous about those conversations, because we started having them earlier, they've been so easy. She's not plugging into all kinds of context from her life already. She's just getting good sound information so that when stuff comes up, she already has that to put it into, if that makes sense. Yeah. Whereas for me, I was learning about, I learned about date rape and acquaintance rape when I was 17 in high school and was contextualizing my sexual experience rather than potentially hearing about that too soon and being able to contextualize what was happening to me in a moment. So that's what I'm always thinking about. Let's have all the conversations now, honestly and openly and without fear, so that she knows she can come to us, so that she has a basis of real practical information. And when the context happens, she already has the information instead of the other way around.
Yeah. And I think so many parents are, in a way, wanting to shield their kids from that stuff, maybe hoping if we don't speak about it, it's not going to happen. And I guess from your experience and from what I've read on your blog or heard you say in interviews, it sounds like Lola, for her age, is very grown up and is able to be a very good free thinker and come up with her own ideas because of the environment that you then created.
Totally. And it's not, if you don't treat these things as like weird taboo subjects, then they aren't. It's as simple as when gay marriage was passing. That was a regular conversation in our household, but it wasn't a new topic for us because whenever she talked about marriage and talked about it within the context of a man and a woman, we were always saying things like, yeah, and you don't have to get married. And some men want to marry men and some women want to marry women. And some people don't ever want to get married ever because that sounds awful to them. And just sort of constantly giving those sort of reminders that the reality of what's normal for people is broad and not defined by what we see on television or even what you see in your daily life. It makes everything real easy. So sex isn't like a taboo conversation in our house. It's just a thing. It's a thing that developmentally she's not interested in at all. And she has the basics of information about it and she knows she can come back to it. But it's just, if it's treated like these are fair topics to talk about and not scary or shamey, then it's not really that heavy after all.
Yeah. Well, look, I look forward to the update whenever that is in however many years of when Lola has read the book and her reaction to the different things that are talked about in there.
Oh, I'm sure. It's coming.
And what did, just out of interest, what was the writing process like for writing the book? And also, how do you feel now if you reread the stuff that you've written there? Is it really emotionally charged? Are you fairly neutral about it?
It's about the same as having the sex talk. So I really made it hard on myself because every time I sat down to write, I wouldn't just think, okay, let's focus on this chapter and then we'll see what my editor says and rework it. Every time I sat down to write, I would think to myself, this is what she's going to have when I die, which is like not a good starting place, you know?
No.
It's like really heavy. And I thought it was going to be this giant manuscript. And my editor kept saying to me, you know, the more short it is, the more useful it is. And think back to, you know, the books that you pick up again and again and the quotes that you hold on to. It really is about the nuggets that are useful and not about saying everything. And so then I jumped into the most paralyzing chapters for me. And once I got those under my belt, it was really easy to write. I really like the way that it reads now, which is it takes me about 6 months of stepping away from something to come back and read it with fresh eyes and go, oh, okay, you're a pretty good writer. I like what you had to say. Because while I'm writing things, I'm like, this is just bullshit. Everything that I just said, this is awful. Who would read this? But now I really like it, and I'm really happy with what's there, and also just really focused on what's next. Having written that one and the body image book were the two that I felt sort of obligated to in a good way. And so now I feel wide open as to what I can take on next with no specific projects hanging over my head. And that's exciting to me too.
And when you say the body image book, do you mean as is with your other book? Okay. Yeah. And so what is that? What do you cover as part of that?
Well, people kept asking me when I was talking about feeling good in my body or exercise being about feeling good and these sort of things that we talk about, how did you get there? And I kept thinking, well, that's a really loaded question because there's no like really succinct answer to that. And so I broke down how I got from hating myself to neutral, and sometimes I still go back to neutral. You know, it's not a linear process. I don't wake up the first day of my period feeling really amazing about my body. I wake up feeling gross, as a lot of women do, and I move to a neutral space. So it's an ongoing cyclical process that rarely goes all the way back to nasty. And I broke those things down into 21 thinking errors, which is kind of the social work language for errors in the way that we think. So it talks about, like, one chapter is about how we speak about this with other people and the sort of camaraderie we find in berating ourselves and talking about changing our bodies as a primary goal. And one chapter talks about the way that you talk to yourself in your mirror. And one chapter might talk about the way you approach food. But it's just tiny shifts in mindfulness that as a whole resulted in me living in a different way. So that's that book. And that was one that people asked for.
Okay. And I know on the cover of that, you're sitting nude. I mean, you've got your knees up and things are covered, but how was that as a decision to get those shots done and to have that as the cover of your book?
Oh, my God. I've never been more nervous to ask a man if I could take my clothes off than for that photo shoot. My friend John Gladman took those photos, and he's a really big deal photographer in Kansas and super professional, and does a lot of boudoir and pinup shoots too. So it wasn't out of his wheelhouse, but it's not something we discussed. We were doing an all-day like lifestyle shoot for my website, and he had to run down the street to borrow a battery for his camera from another photographer because his ran out. And while he was gone, I was sitting there, and all I could think about was, I know that I need a nude. And at that point, I didn't realize it was for my book cover, but I just knew that I needed that. So he came back in, and I was like, so, and he, yeah, and it was really awkward. Because I just kind of threw it on him and myself. But they turned out really wonderful. And my thinking about it being the book cover was just kind of like putting my money where my mouth is, you know, that this isn't the same photo as Cameron Diaz has on the front of her, the body book. You know, this is not the aesthetic of women we see on book covers, and it is who I am today. And that's what this is about. So let me really be about that. And it was a really good experience for me, even looking at some of the other photos that I didn't end up choosing for the book cover, mostly because I found them to be more sexy, and that wasn't really the point of the book cover. But seeing like a really beautiful picture of me where you can see rolls in my stomach, and finding all of that to be really beautiful was a first for me in a really beautiful way. So that was a spur of the moment decision. In fact, I emailed my husband about it as I left. Like, I just took some nudes. Hope that's cool. But I'm really glad that I did. And in fact, he doesn't listen to podcasts, so it's fine to say, but I just took another round of nudes, both for my website and then some special ones for him for Christmas. So I've done it again, and I'm really excited about it.
Nice. Well, the picture that you have reminds me of the picture for the Embrace documentary, the new documentary that's coming out about like body positivity and whatnot. And I work a lot with women with disordered eating and kind of on that spectrum. And I know for a lot of them going through that process of overcoming body issues, or people who end up heavier after going through recovery, getting boudoir photos done or having like professional nude photos done can be really empowering and can be just such an amazing thing for them to do. And they get those photos and just how beneficial it can be to go through that process.
Yeah, and it's totally individual. For some people, modesty is really empowering. And for some people, being able to present yourself totally nude to the world is super empowering. And, all of that is 100% up to the individual to define. But for me, it definitely feels in the same way that it did to finally realize that my husband loved me for who I am, to put myself out there like that and say, here it is, here's exactly who I am, period, is always really a sigh of relief. Like, you really like me, or you really do hate me, and you've already figured that out. But it is safe and okay for me to show up exactly as I am.
Yeah. So you run a retreat called I Empower Retreat that I think you run it with a couple of other people. Can you just describe what that is about and maybe who it's for?
So who it's for and what it's about kind of goes back to how it started.
Okay.
I was in a mastermind group with a group of female entrepreneurs, and one of the women was a Krav Maga instructor, Jenny Trower, based out of Austin, Texas. Okay. And so I started following her business page just, to be supportive. And she had videos of herself working out and hitting things and fighting. And one of them in particular, she talked about it being okay to be angry. And all of her videos made me physically uncomfortable. Okay. And I have a personal practice of always walking towards those things because I think that there is more information for me there than I need. And so I called her after one of our meetings and just said, like, your videos make me really uncomfortable. And logically, I think that what you do is really cool, and I can't wrap my head around it, but they freak me out. Can we talk about that? And she said that that was a pretty common response of people who were survivors of any kind of assault, and that when she works with women like me, her goal is always to work them back to a comfortability fighting out of the position they were attacked from and winning. And that sounded terrifying and really appealing to me. And so we started talking about how I could come to Austin to work with her, and decided that that was probably a whole event. So we joined forces with Jarrett Arthur, who's another amazing Krav Maga instructor. She's in LA, and came up with this model for a retreat wherein I talk about finding your voice and vulnerability as power, and just sort of like emotional landscape as power. They do physical power, and we learn to fight. And then we have a guest each year. So the first year, my sister did yoga for like grounding and quiet physical power. And this year, a woman came who does really interesting, like self-energy work through movement, which is really hard to explain, but was really fun and awesome. And then at the end, it culminates with fighting a man in an attacker suit, which is the only time a man makes an appearance at the event. And both years, it has been just profound to watch, because every person in the room the entire time is constantly reminded that they don't have to do anything they don't want to do, and they don't have to explain themselves to anyone, which, especially the first year and how scared I was of it, was really important information for me, because it gave me permission to keep showing up because I wanted to. Yeah. And we did it different both years, but basically you're totally in control of what happens, but they want to give you options that stretch you. And a lot of women will choose to be either surprised in the way they're attacked or attacked from a position that they have experienced before. And it is just the most righteous rage I've ever felt in a room while all of these women are, screaming and cheering you on, and you get to win. And for myself, and I think a lot of the women who attend, even if they haven't had an experience like that, the fear of it that is placed on us is very real, and the likelihood that it could happen to us is very real. So even just having to live with that fear all the time is big. But for a lot of women who have been assaulted in some way, there becomes a deep-seated fear that maybe it happened to you because you couldn't fight back. Or maybe you could have, but you didn't have it in you. Like maybe that part of you is just broken. Yeah. So to know that you have that is so powerful. And those women who do the instruction talk about how they have had several students who were attacked after having gone through that training. And what they hear when it happens is all of the women who are in the room cheering for them, which is like so good. It makes me tear up. So it's specifically for people who identify as women, and we don't tell anybody what that needs to look like, who are interested in feeling powerful. And then we address that in a lot of ways. Everyone is stretched outside of their comfort zone, and it's really a super powerful uniting event for people who are able to attend.
Wow, amazing. I mean, did you say that you obviously wanted to put it on initially so that you could work with these people, and then decided to create the event or the retreat? So did you then go through that process even though you were running the retreat as well? And I just how was that, knowing you were going to go through that, but also had to be in the position of being kind of the leader or just having a slightly different role to the other people there?
Well, the first year, everyone walked away saying that they felt transformed, but I definitely had an out-of-body experience the entire time I was there. Okay. I remember the first night, I spent the night at Jenny's house because it was in Austin the first year, and woke up the next morning, and the men who were going to be in the attacker suit, we had 2 the first year, were having breakfast. And they were just like bro fighter dudes, and I was like, who are these guys and what is happening? And I was listening to Jarrett and Jenny explain to them the way that they coach and the way that the scenarios would run, and specifically that there was a signal they wanted them to give in the suit when they had had enough, because they do get, beat up in the suit. And then they would rip the woman off of them. And I was thinking, I'm obviously not doing that, and you're not ripping me off of anyone, and that sounds horrible. And then they were going on to talk about how they would go one by one, and then everybody would be watching, and I'm like, one by one with everyone watching? And so I tried to change it. I was like, maybe we could do 2 groups, and then that would be a little bit I was trying to completely rearrange the way that they teach. I knew better because I thought it sounded absolutely terrifying. But it turns out they know their field of expertise better than I do. And it went really well, but it was terrifying for me. And I remember when I was trying to get them to change the way that they were instructing, thinking, I don't know if I'm going to make it through this weekend alive. That's the thing about, this sort of paralyzing fear, is that there's not a rationale to it. It's like, if I have to look at this thing, I will surely just explode and cease to exist. Because it was so terrifying to me. But I think that was part of the beauty of the first event, is that we were all, including them in my work, forced to go significantly outside of our comfort zones together and role model that as a part of the leadership of the event. So, they're pretty openly women who struggle with talking about feelings. And so they have to do difficult work too. But yeah, it was daunting. And after that first event, I struggled to kind of come back from it, just because it was so powerful and so triggering on a lot of levels. But when I bounced back from that first event, I was a completely changed person. And even just the way I walk around, I can feel my confidence is different. I didn't realize that I carried so much fear with me all the time until I finally dropped it. And that gave me the confidence to know that I wasn't broken and that I could fight back. And in fact, I was really strong at fighting back, which is powerful to know in your bones.
And so, I mean, that sounds amazing. Did you, with all of that knowledge, when you did it the second time round, was there stuff you're like, we should do this a little differently, or we're going to do this because I think that's going to be even more helpful?
Well, I definitely changed some of the things that I did and will change again this year. Okay. But in terms of their instruction, they are the best. And so they changed some things up as well, but not dramatically in terms of the setup. For me, though, this year, Jenny and Jarrett both mentioned that I was just smiling the whole time I was fighting because I knew that it would be fun. And I knew that it was okay, you know. And the guy that we did that did the attacker suit this year, he flew in from LA, so he trains with Jarrett regularly. And he was allowed to speak just a little bit before we did the attacker part. But he said that he was a man who was raised by a single mother and surrounded by sisters, and he really was honored to be there because he understood how important it was for women to do this work. And so, you know, the suit is on well, and he's, you know, feel free to hit him hard, but he was there because he understood how important it was to us. And oh my gosh, did like everyone cry because it was just such a nice thing to have that be affirmed. And then particularly by someone who was really putting his money where his mouth was and letting us beat him up for it. Oh, he left with a bloody nose, actually, because somebody kicked him in a specific place in the helmet where it wasn't very well protected. And so the helmet actually cut his nose, but he just kept blotting the blood off and coming back. Which was amazing. But it's also, as I understand it, in that world, it's a pretty cool experience to get to be in the attacker suit too, because it's just such a specialized training that isn't done very often. So, you know, it's not like these guys are victims in the scenario either, but he was such a great guy to do that with us as well.
And so when is the next one of these that you're doing?
We haven't set a date yet, but theoretically it will be October 2017, and we are looking at locations right now in LA. So we move it just so that it is geographically advantageous to different people every year, but people come from all over the country and Canada last year to come.
And do people do it multiple times? Like, this sounds like it would be so empowering. They'd be like, when it rolls around the next year, they're like, I want to do it again.
Well, we've just done it twice, and we had, I think, 5 people come back, and then a lot of those people brought siblings and friends with them. Yeah. So it is a bit of an investment just because it's an event with a lot of moving parts. Yeah. All of the equipment and the attacker, and then we also have a mental health professional available should anybody need any immediate support, you know, because we're specifically doing triggering stuff. Sure. So it's just, it's quite an ordeal to put on. So the investment is not small either, but we certainly have a lot of lifers, and it's really fun to see them back every year, and also fun to see how those people continue to communicate with themselves in the private Facebook groups afterwards, and how dramatically people change their lives when they get home is the coolest part.
Yeah. Wow. Well, look, Erin, I'm really loving this conversation, but I want to be respectful of your time, and it's also getting pretty late over here. But before we wrap this up, where can people go to connect with you or find out more information? And I'm going to put everything in the show notes. But yeah, tell people where they should be going. And if you do have anything that you want to promote, then feel free to.
Not right now. I'm working on, well, gosh, there's always something. I'm working on another book that I'm hoping to release in the spring, and currently working with a friend of mine named Dr. T. Williams on a lot of resources for white people in the wake of the U.S. election who are wanting to learn more about oppression in this country. So there's always a lot of things coming, but the best way to find out about those things is to be on my newsletter list. And I don't come up with something to say every day. I more send newsletters when there's important information and about once a month something to just think about. So that would be the best place to find me at IamErinBrown.com and stay up to date on whatever the newest things I have coming are.
Okay, perfect. Well, look, thank you so much for coming on the show. Since discovering your stuff, I've been just making my way through your blog and different podcast interviews, and so it's been really great to be able to speak to you today.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's been awesome.
Thanks for listening to Real Health Radio. If you are interested in more details, you can find them at the 7 Health website. That's www.7health.com.